Hi, Juliana.
Hi, Jeff.
Oh. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Hello. So there are just a few of us today. I was wondering maybe if it'd be good to start off with some introductions. I could kick it off. So, Yumigwen Tsugatsan. I'm Chelsea Schmidtke. I'm from originally Alberta and area. I'm Cree Métis on my mom's side, from Big Stone Cree Nation, and German on my dad's side. And I've been working with NUICC for the last year and a half or so, helping to support the day-to-day admin and that sort of thing, working with 4 urban labs. So here to help kick things off with Erwin and Isabella. Maybe I'll let one of you two go next.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Happy to see you. Keep your videos off or turn it on, up to you. Both is great. And I think we're recording this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can share this. I think we'll probably get more participants through the viewing of the recording than perhaps live. And my name is Erwin Ostindi. I'm working in the office for NUICC, and I wear a couple of hats. One of them is supporting the communications and research. And of course, today we're all talking about research, and I guess we call it knowledge mobilization as well. I'm also, another hat I wear as a grad student at Simon Fraser University. So I also bring to NUICC kind of critical urban Indigenous governance studies. So I'm excited about today and happy to be here.
Isabella?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabella. I'm supporting NUICC through or with WAR and Chelsea and Erwin. And yeah, nice seeing you again. Some of you we saw in March, so hope you're doing well.
All right. Did you want to pick someone to go next, Isabella?
Yes, I'll pick Ian.
Sure. So, hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on life. Afternoon for me. I'm in Fredericton. My name is Ian Peach. I'm currently Executive Director of the New Brunswick Aboriginal Peoples Council, as well as working as Director of Research and Projects for the Wolastoqey Language and Culture Center here in Fredericton. I have been a government official, a scholar and academic leader, a consultant at various times in my life, and have done a lot of work on urban Indigenous issues over the years. So looking forward to thinking about where to go next with urban Indigenous research.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Can you pick someone to go next?
Sure. Samantha? Oh no, I still see a dot. Oh, are you on, Samantha? Perfect.
I am. Good morning from Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 here. I'm part of the coordination team for the Prince Albert Urban Indigenous Coalition, and our co-hosts, Don Robbins and Janet Carrier. So Janet's Executive Director for the Friendship Center in Prince Albert, and Dawn is the Executive Director for the West Flat Citizens Group. But they are out in the park. Actually, we have a Heart of the Youth powwow happening today. Unfortunately, I am tied up with some meetings, so can only stay on this one for about half an hour. So I do apologize, but yeah, great to see everybody. It's nice to connect in person earlier this year. Sorry, I wasn't not sure if there was something specific you wanted me to share.
Oh, we're just doing brief introductions before we get into things, but thanks for sharing. Yeah.
You bet.
Did you want to pick someone to go next?
Oh, sure. And again, sorry, jumped on a little late here, so I'm not sure who's all gone, but maybe I'll pass to Juliana.
Yes, sure. I'm I'm still trying to figure out here what's happening with my camera. Hopefully you guys are going to be able to see my face soon. So Juliana Fialo here. I work for the municipality of Cambridge Bay. I'm the manager of the coalition initiatives. I've been working there for the past 2 years. Hopefully we're going to be able to keep leading this work this year and the upcoming year. Yes, we are one of the only 2 coalitions, active coalitions in Nunavut. So we're trying to strengthen our work and keep spreading the word around the territory.
Thanks, Juliana. Do you want to pick someone to go next?
Yeah, let me see here who didn't. Marina?
Oh, you're on mute, Marina. Oops, sorry, you're still on mute. Oh, Marina, we're not able to hear you. Your mic is on mute.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying ignore my lips. I don't wear lipsticks, and I was playing with the apps and it colored my lips, and I don't know how to turn it off, and I'll figure it out after the meeting. So try to ignore that. And I'm coming to you from Whitehorse, Yukon. And I'm involved with NUICC through the Yukon Council of First Nations. And I am the FASD project coordinator for the Yukon under Justice for CYFN. And I'm really happy to be part of this group. And yeah, I'm very new, so catching up to everything and finding out new stuff all the time. So yeah, good to see you.
Thanks so
You
much,
won't forget me, that's for sure.
You know, the lipstick doesn't look bad. I wouldn't have known it was an app if you didn't say anything.
Okay. No, I don't wear lipsticks, which is why I wanted to try it. So yeah.
Yeah.
I've got the app that makes me look awake because I'm pretty tired here out in the West Coast. So
I need one of those.
And
And Chantal does send her regrets if she's
Oh.
not here this morning. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thanks for that. And the last one, I suppose, is Mike.
Hi, my name's Mike. I attended the NUICC conference in March with Sandra and Sally with the North Bay Indigenous Coalition. I'm located in North Bay, Ontario. Yeah, I'm just here to observe and gather some information for our local and provincial community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, thanks so much for making time for this today, everyone. And it's really actually kind of nice to see someone from, the various corners of the continent today. So I'm really happy to be able to share today. All right, Erwin, did you want to kick us off?
Sure. Good to see everybody. I mean, this is for us who do this Monday to Friday, this is super exciting to have coalitions present because this model of NUICC organizing was actually planned a couple of years ago, this idea that there'd be caucuses. And when I started with NUICC a couple of years ago, there was a small communications caucus, and I suggested we start a research caucus. And I think it's reflective of the fact that NUICC is still building its legs and building infrastructure. I think in the next few months, they'll be building a TOR, terms of reference. So I think we'll also be building trust and relationships to do this work together. And it's a lot of work. And so I think today is going to be a rundown on some of that work. There's more work we didn't put into the agenda, but I think it's really important just to present the most important things that are on the plate, where members can get actively involved. And there's some other possibilities or other research things that we could do. If there was, if someone knew a millionaire, I'll put that on the agenda, number 7, any friends that are millionaires. But, there's a shortage of resources for NUICC in general. And so we kind of move at the speed of trust. and we move at the speed of funding. And so research is certainly like that as well. I would say, though, that the way we do research is different, and I hope that that's one of the takeaways from today, is what is research, what is knowledge mobilization. So we'll do a bit of an inventory on that, the first few slides, first few minutes, and I'm mindful that some people got to take off. I think some people have to take off in 20 minutes and someone else has to take off in 50 minutes. So I think we can't pack it all into 30 minutes, but we will certainly try to get it in for 50. And then maybe we can leave the balance of the time. We'll do more of a presentation then, and then we'll do more questions at the end, or discussion, sorry, at the end. But 100% interrupt me anytime, whether through just unmuting yourself or using your hand signal just to throw in a question or clarification. We're going to try to avoid jargon as well. So, so the Hub series, it's our event coming up really quick. I said I was going to avoid jargon, and here's 2 pieces of jargon right there. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So let's just give a quick preview of that, because that's one of our monthly Hub series events, and that's coming up next week in Saskatoon. Quick update on what research we're trying to do. And I welcome folks like Ian and Chelsea and others and Isabella to jump in. Summer camp, you're kind of wondering what's that for? Well, it's we're going to introduce this idea of the Knowledge Hub producing a summer camp, a virtual summer camp. So let's give this a dry run, and we'll talk about that and unpack that a bit. And we really welcome folks' ideas on how to do a virtual summer camp for research geeks, urban Indigenous research geeks across the country. PKP is the technology tool that we're using, that's used around the world. It's coincidentally hosted here in Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, but it's basically a journal platform where coalitions and researchers across the country can share documents and share information. And then the last thing is like sharing what you're all doing, what we're all doing outside of this agenda. Like people are working on projects, people are doing studies, maybe someone's hired or looking to hire a research person or a policy person for their coalition, or one of their member organizations in their coalition is having a research forum or something like that. So we really want to start the practice of sharing information. Some of you have seen this before, so I won't go into it too long. Folks who aren't familiar with it, please enjoy the visuals. But I think we did do, if folks are in Ottawa, we did do a pretty good overview of the Knowledge Hub. But essentially, I would say, just backing up a little bit, when our team was hired by NUICC a couple of years ago to support messaging and communication and building a profile for NUICC across the country, the first question we asked was, well, what stories are you telling? And really quickly, we came to an agreement with the NUICC National Council that a research program that lifted up the experiences of urban Indigenous communities in our cities, those stories were the communication. Those stories were the advocacy pieces. Those stories were the policy platforms. And without those stories, without that knowledge mobilization, NUICC really was just a kind of a conceptual idea that we really had to build a policy platform that reflected all of the coalitions from coast to coast to coast. And so we do that slowly. We're patient. Again, NUICC does not have a lot of resources, so it's gently moving and building this program. But we've done some really amazing things over the last 2 years. One is the monthly speaker series. I think most of those videos from the speaker series are up on the website. Toolkits are a jargony thing. Toolkits are a great resource for supporting, educating, lifting people's experiences up, capacity building around key issues. So we did one on driving policy through stories. So how do you build policy when you're doing community-based research? So that's that idea of listening to our communities. We know this data. We have the data in our communities. We have the data in our organizations. We know what's happening and what's failing for policy in our communities. And we know the harm of colonialism. We know how it impacts our community members. And so this toolkit was really about the experiences we have across the country of building policy through gathering of our stories. And of course, the journal was sort of like, hey, NUICC exists. We're really passionate about storytelling. Their title, Stories Have Always Been Our Governance, was deliberately chosen to kind of reflect this ethos, this worldview that we own. We have traditions of storytelling. That's how we know who we are, and that's how we communicate our experience to each other. But it's also how we can communicate to governments and advocates, potential partners. So also with respect to UNDRIP, Stories Have Always Been Our Governance is also, here we are on the downtown east side, you can hear the sirens. It also reflects the aspirations of governance, urban governance, which is something we'll unpack a little bit later as well. So Stories Have Always Been Our Governance is really an opportunity for urban coalitions to say, we know who we are, we have rights, and we want to govern. We don't just simply want to be service delivery partners for governments. As I mentioned, we do these events, and I welcome Chelsea or Isabella to jump in anytime. This one is particularly focused on the question of, how do we overcome the failure of justice, equity, and diversity? How do we add this perspective that colonialism is on the kind of ground floor, and we can look at inclusion, we can look at hiring practices, we can look at diversity practices, but in reality, unless we deal with the issue of colonialism in our cities, we're only achieving so much change, structural change. And so looking at JEDI and those types of diversity systems that are very, very popular amongst white folks in these cities, and those cities are, largely white governed spaces. And so they exclude a lot of folks. And so they do want to do some repair of their systems, or they want to perpetuate their systems by doing some repair. And it's our job to say, actually, UNDRIP opens up a new paradigm. And UNDRIP is a different way of framing how rights are understood in municipalities. Again, this one is speaking to municipal governments. So it's less about our stories for ourselves, for our own communities. It's speaking to municipal governments. And so we really want to, because we work in these ecosystems, and I know some of you are working for governments, the ecosystems include municipal governments. As you saw in Ottawa, we're really keen on this issue of data sovereignty. It's about our own governance, our own control of data. That's a kind of a key thread through our research work. Distinctions-based. We recognize in the urban Indigenous space that there's continuing harm from, we can say Canada, but actually I see it here in Vancouver and in British Columbia. All colonial governments are relying on a distinctions-based framework. And what it does is it excludes and perpetuates harm to the offers of the 80%, the up to 80% who are living away from their communities. In many cases, intergenerationally in our cities. And because they're intergenerational, they're members of intact urban communities. And those urban communities, the federal government said in the Misquatis decision, and there's one of our events that we did, the Hub did 3 months ago, it says, the federal court said, urban communities exist, they are an entity. And in our understanding, UNDRIP provides self-determination. UNDRIP and Misquatis together reveal that we actually have a pathway forward. Urban coalitions have a pathway forward to exercising our governance rights, our self-determination rights. And so that's an important thing to unpack. And then this role of UNDRIP right now. Many colonial governments, just like reconciliation, what do we do? What do we do? We want to do something. They don't know what to do, or they want to do something, or they want to appear to do something with like reconciliation, very performative. So one of our roles can be, how do we influence and how do we the municipal spaces where our coalitions are working, and how do we support our coalitions, and how can coalitions train each other through mutual aid practices around what they're learning around UNDRIP. And so we've had the benefit, our team has Matthew Norris, he's a PhD student at UBC researching UNDRIP implementation. We have Kamala Todd, who is the technical committee chair for UNDRIP in Vancouver, kind of leading edge practitioner. So Kamala and Matthew have really influenced our work. But Justin out in St. John's, Newfoundland, also hosted with the AFN out in Newfoundland. They hosted a discussion. So we know our members are interested in this. And so this is going to be a really important piece for us to address as well, because our members want to know what is the best practices, what is the good thinking around UNDRIP implementation, then how can they adapt it to their local city. All right, ripping through here. Any questions so far? I've avoided jargon, I think, successfully. Ian, Isabella, Chelsea, jump in here anytime. So we've got the Knowledge Hub that I've explained so far. We're reaching out and inviting people to participate, and glad to see folks today. We know there's more folks and more folks who watch the video. And we're slowly building. We've done a lot of surveying work. Isabella, I don't know how many articles and pieces we have already in the environmental scan of urban Indigenous research, but it's in the probably around the 100 papers and research papers around urban Indigenous issues. We tend to avoid, a Northern First Nation health study, but if it's around urban Indigenous mental health or economic rights for urban Indigenous people, that's the type of research we're interested in, urban specific. There's lots of academic work, there's lots of policy work that happens across the country, but only about 10% of it is actually about urban. And as a quick footnote, at the NUICC conference in Toronto last week, which is the Native American Indigenous Studies Association, it's the biggest gathering on the planet of Indigenous research. 1,000 people were there. There was about 400 books in the book fair. And out of those 400 books on Indigenous issues, 4 or 5 were on urban. So 1%. So that just shows why we're so focused on this Knowledge Hub, specifically around urban Indigenous, because that's our experiences, that's the work, that's our mandate, and that's the community that we want to build. And so we call it a community of practice. That's a bit of jargon. So we want to bring people together around NUICC, because NUICC can't do this on its own. The coalitions do great research in Lethbridge or in Vancouver or in Whitehorse, but they can only do so much on their own. And we've got sisters and brothers in other coalitions across the country doing the exact same work. So our role for this caucus, our community of practice, is to create a space for that mutual aid to happen, where coalitions can be supporting other coalitions. And sometimes a coalition can't do a big project because it's a federal policy. So it's better that NUICC can lean in. The coalitions can work with an amalgamated national voice like NUICC and say, let's do a bigger study where that can benefit all of our coalitions. So this is really big stuff. And the first one that is in development came as a result of the National Council. The National Council, by the way, is territorial and provincial reps representing coalitions in each region or province. They've been meeting, they meet every single month. They also meet in person sometimes. They're meeting in Saskatoon in person next week. So we learned that the UPIP was self-evaluating, that the urban program for Indigenous people from the federal government, which is their funding system, which they make available to, ironically, First Nations as well as urban coalitions, is not very much money. It's a tiny bit of money compared to federal investments in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. It's a tiny amount of money because of that distinctions-based. Tiny bit of money for UPIP. And UPIP is going to be self-evaluated. So ISC is saying, hey, how is our program operating? And they want to ask some of our coalitions. And we said, hang on, stop right there. Data sovereignty, self-determination. We will tell you what we think of UPIP rather than you cherry picking who you talk to and how you frame the question of your own evaluation. And what better way to evaluate if UPIP is even meeting the needs of coalitions? If we don't have a sense of what our expectations are as a national voice, or what coalitions are learning and experiencing and sharing that experience, how can we evaluate the effectiveness of what UPIP is doing? Yeah, we can evaluate it technically. We like or we don't like how they evaluated the grants, or it's not clear what the granting determination policies are, or there's some technical things I'm sure we could give them information on. But the bigger question is like, what's happening, and why is so much harm being perpetuated on our community members while the federal government is investing tons, lots and lots of money. So is it actually an effective program? What type of a program do coalitions want? So we're calling that a NUICC Urban Indigenous Strategy, so that we can then compare that to UPIP. The benefit of doing that as well is then NUICC has a mandate from coalitions to understand, like, what are we actually advocating for? Any questions on that one, or comments, or you want to jump in? That's probably the most important news, I think, and that's going to lead into the summer camp, which hopefully we'll spend most of our time on today. Next one is a small one. We were approached by Imagine Canada. Damon Johnson, our national co-chair, attended a meeting on behalf of NUICC in Ottawa 3 weeks ago. And it's clear and obvious that our coalitions and urban Indigenous not-for-profits represent a massive piece of the charity and nonprofit sector in Canada. And it's kind of weird for me, like, I've been around charity and nonprofit work for 30 years in Vancouver and in British Columbia. You don't often think about Indigenous charities as being a massive group of that, because of the colonial nature of charities, the history of charity work. It's quite problematic. But in reality, women in general, often women, in the last decades have built these service delivery systems in our cities across Canada. And those service delivery systems became organizations, right? It was moms organizing after-school daycare collectives. It was moms arguing for better healthcare for their kids, and sometimes men did the work. But it's a very, very gendered space. 80 to 95% are women in most of this work that we're doing, and so slowly we created organizations. Canada, of course, didn't want these organizations to be political. Canada wanted these organizations to be service delivery agents. And then we've got 40 years of neoliberalism impacting the way funding is distributed. It's all annualized funding. It's very harmful. It's very colonial, these funding systems, these funding arrangements. So here we are, surviving and growing and thriving. And in fact, representing a huge chunk of the non-for-profit and charity sector in Canada. And so, which has been a very white space, let's be clear. That space is very, very white. And so through COVID and through Black Lives Matter, that issue of equity and inclusion and the colonial nature of charity and philanthropy has really become wide open. And so a group like Imagine Canada that represents the charity not-for-profit sector is saying, like, we don't know what the Indigenous space needs. Can you help us, NUICC? And NUICC is saying the same thing back to Imagine Canada. We need more information on our memberships. We need more information on the urban Indigenous organizations, the thousands of urban Indigenous organizations that are not represented because of this distinction-based framework, because of the way people are just surviving, getting the doors open, getting the services delivered. So that's an exciting piece of work. We hope it'll get funded. We have a request into IG Wealth, which has an Indigenous fund. The next one is launching the PKP program, which is the information hub. We were building it on our NUICC website, and we realized technically it was the wrong way to do it because we have a WordPress platform, and the PKP engine can work with WordPress, but it's actually better on its own. So we're in the process of doing that now. And that's going to be the repository, the kind of library where NUICC members can share articles, policy pieces, drafts, get some feedback, publish some things. Speaking of publishing, that NAISA conference book fair that I mentioned, where there's only like 1% of the books were urban Indigenous, I spoke with 3 publishers of academic press, like University of Manitoba Press, which publishes things that get into teachers' hands and students' hands across the country. They said if NUICC, if the Knowledge Hub came up with a journal collection of articles on key issues, they would publish it as a book. So there's another project we can put on the agenda. Ian, do you want to jump in?
Just to support that, I've worked with Manitoba Press before. Trying to think which of my books we did with Manitoba, and they're really great to work with. So if they're making that offer, that's a real opportunity for us.
Cool. And they said, they warned us, it's like, it takes 2 years. But that basically means that students and teachers across Canada, including urban Indigenous students, will have a book that reflects their experiences. And that's how we can influence policy as well. And then pending funding and capacity, getting our work out in another journal. As you know, we did the journal last year. We'd love to do another one, but it's not currently in the budget. ISC severely underfunds NUICC, and coalitions are just, surviving. So we lack funding. So funding is a real issue. Quickly looking at how we engage with our membership, and I appreciate that. I think a calendar invite went out for this meeting, and I would suggest that maybe we make these. We don't just embed a Zoom link in a calendar invite, but that we make sure that it's super easy for folks who may have misplaced an invite or an email, that it's really easy for them to jump onto these caucus meetings. Because I think ideally we have 20 or 30 people in these meetings. We want to grow to that point. And so NUICC does monthly newsletters. We have the website. We can do blog posts there. We do event listings. We use Eventbrite for the event listings. We use MailChimp for the monthly e-newsletters. We want to be including members, coalitions information in those newsletters, right? The newsletter should be also coalitions speaking to each other about what cool things that they're doing. And then, of course, we've got Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I see Chelsea's got her hand up.
Yeah, just maybe this is an opportunity to ask about the timing of this meeting, for instance. Is there, a time in the week or the month that would work better for folks in terms of availability or being able to communicate in these types of sessions? You have to run, Samantha. Okay.
I do, yeah, for sure. I don't know, maybe a doodle poll. Maybe there was already a doodle poll that was done probably, but I may have missed that. But yeah, just thanks everyone. Sorry that I do have to run early this round.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'll send one out.
Perfect, thanks.
You can. And is my screen being shared? Yeah. So I mentioned fundraising a few times, and I did it for a reason, because it cautions us on what we can do and how much we can do, but it also is the path forward. And I think there's been a clear consensus by the National Council, and we have one member here in Ian, so feel free to jump in. But I think there's a clear expectation that fundraising is a part of the NUICC work plan, because the underfunding of NUICC by Canada basically predicts the future of NUICC, that it is a consultative table. It is a weak, ineffective, underfunded, under-resourced, no capacity to do research and policy development, no capacity to do advocacy. It is as its funding level is designed to do. And so that's 262,000 annual funding, less administrative. It's about 224,000. So you can't do much as a national voice for that amount of money. And so council put together a budget proposal for $1.4 million, which would have like a full-time staff person just supporting and engaging the coalitions, like just nurturing and supporting coalitions, or a full-time research coordinator, so that they can involve community members and staff and policy people at different coalitions, as well as universities, and get research programs going. So different, and then a coordinator, and so that none of that's going to happen unless NUICC does fundraising. Same thing with the research. So we did secure, after frankly complaining, we did secure $28,000 in research funding from ISC. They only have a tiny pot of $100,000, which we should talk about another time. We met with the McConnell Foundation. They're very interested in receiving a proposal from us, particularly around the economics of reconciliation. That sounds kind of jargony, but I'm just quoting them. We talked with Circle on Philanthropy, which is a leading edge group. Chris Archie leads that. We had a meeting with her. We've also, incidentally, just for transparency, have had technical meetings with the research teams at NAFC, National Association of Friendship Centers, and also Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, CAP. They both have research departments. I think NAFC's is like 6 or 8 people strong, like it's massive. And CAPS has, I think, a 2-person team. So we believe as technical people, as researchers, that urban Indigenous knowledge and urban Indigenous research should not be siloed in agencies, that urban Indigenous people's data and knowledge about what's happening and the harm being perpetuated in our communities, that's universal truths that shouldn't be siloed in agencies. And so we're going to continue that discussion, that we want to build a national framework that doesn't matter which agency or organization or coalition you work with, that there's a set number of informations, pieces. You know, it's easy to say in northern Saskatchewan, women's prisons are made up of 100% Indigenous women. That's a data point. That's a statistic, right? That's a statistic we know about, that journalists can write about, that policy can be fought over because of that statistical point. But if we don't know how many urban Indigenous people there are in Canada, is it 950,000? Is it 1.1 million? You know, how do we evaluate statistics? You know, there's so many universal sets of information that we need to do our work better. And so that's one thing that we hope to do this year, and convince our friends across the country to do that work together. And maybe that's a SHIRC partnership grant. SHIRC is this, help me out here, Ian.
Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada.
There you go. And so Ian has had experience with them in the past, so it's really exciting to have Ian's expertise in the room. And that's major funding. That's $250,000. That's $1 or $2 million. That's short-term or long-term studies. So it's really an important opportunity for us to potentially cluster together. Ian?
The other thing about going to those other sources like SHIRC is that to do things like create an urban Indigenous strategy concept from NUICC is that it would allow us to speak truth to power. And part of the speaking truth to power relates exactly to your first bullet. I mean, part of the reason in my mind, and I've said this to Erwin before, is ISK has such a tiny research budget because it's culturally not ISK's deal. ISK is about Indigenous service delivery and funding service deliverers to do third-party delivery of what should be government services. It's not about building coalitions, building relationships, reconciliation, any of that stuff. That's all CERNAC stuff, Crown Indigenous Relations. And to my mind, part of what an independent NUICC review of UPIP versus intelligible, legitimate urban Indigenous strategy would say is ISK is the wrong place for any of this. If you're going to turn UPIP, Government of Canada, into something that's actually real, send all your money over to CERNAC, where the culture fits the intention. But we can't say that if we're getting funded by ISK. Rather.
So yeah, you're bringing out the bigger context and the structural limits of what we're doing, and the complex work and discussions that National Council and coalitions have to have together as a group to say, do we want to change the structures? Do we want to change the dynamics, and how are we going to do that together? And is there a role for research? Is there a role for storytelling? MyTax is another system. MyTax is a government-funded program that supports the wages of student researchers. So we could be NUICC could be sponsoring positions in wherever you live. If there's a university in your town that is eligible to receive MyTax funding, you could do a project. We could work together. 6 or 7 coalitions. We could get 6 or 7 students in 6 or 7 cities, all answering, all working under one umbrella. And those 6 or 7 researchers with the coalitions could actually do a national study because there's 7 different footprints. So these are the kind of things that we can do as a group. SHIRC Connections, the same thing, but it's smaller. It's like up to 25,000. the gathering we did in Ottawa, the meeting we're doing in Saskatoon, the journal. There's all kinds of things that are eligible for a $25,000 grant. And to be straight, we don't have the money. And so we need to find money this year to do this beautiful work. And we need to do the beautiful work to grow and to prove that there's a role for NUICC as a national voice for coalitions, that there's that the coalitions themselves can't do all this change making, because the change in Brandon, the change in Le Pas, the change in Victoria, the change in St. John's, Newfoundland, yes, we experience these local conditions, but they're federal and provincial and territorial impositions, failed policies that are affecting our lives in our cities. And so those solutions are not just municipal. Those solutions are often federal, provincial, and territorial. So that's where the bigger alliances for research can actually make the big difference. We can punch over our weight by unifying across the country. And so the last one is about inviting partnerships. Again, we are the upstarts. We're the disruptors, because NUICC is the new kid on the block. NAFC has been around for 50 years. CAP has been around for 50 years. We're the future. The coalitions and the urban Indigenous not-for-profits are in the thousands, and those organizations are not particularly well organized. And so that's the future, is the urban communities self-organizing through coalitions. And so who can support that work with us? I think we have an enormous number of allies. And so can they come to the table and support us as well in NUICC's infancy? All right, who's ready for summer camp? I know I am. Chelsea, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So as you can see, there's, well, maybe jumping back to that beginning slide, there was a few items identified that besides the urban, like the UPIP program self-evaluation, also leading up to what will be the pre-budget submission in the fall. Yeah, perfectly. There's a few items that we actually quite a few work that we would need to do as a group to be able to get the information together to submit deliverables that would offer a voice or perspective from urban Indigenous coalitions and their members to be able to inform those deliverables. So realizing that summer is a tough time sometimes to connect, we really wanted to have a really pointed and succinct strategy in terms of engaging with coalitions and some, perhaps concentrated subjects or topic areas to be able to inform this work and those deliverables leading up to the fall. Is that a good explanation?
Yeah, is there, do people, before we move on, maybe this is a good chance to just open it up if people have questions, just to clarify, because this is really the big picture structure of the next few months. So maybe, and Ian, this is the first time you're seeing it laid out like this. Does it resonate with you in terms of what you're witnessing here?
I think there's a perfect logic track to it. Terms of reference, setting the plan, the roles and responsibilities, the way in which we have voice, the strategy. So create the alternative and use the strategy to critique current situation in a substantive fashion, leading ultimately to pre-budget submission, the fundraising part of the game, where you say, okay, we know UPIP isn't good enough, and this is why, because we have this alternative that has legitimacy. So are you guys going to come to the plate in Ottawa and fund something legitimate, or are you going to continue to marginalize us and play your little colonialist game? So yeah, I think it's an impeccable logic track.
Mm-hmm. And with the discussion that you mentioned earlier, Ian, like, does it look like a pre-budget submission, not just to the department that the program runs under, but perhaps another?
Yeah, Canada writ large, absolutely.
And timing wise, to be honest, and I know Damon Johnson, our national co-chair from Winnipeg, he recognizes also that this means lobbying the federal Conservatives as well, because there's a significant chance that in the fall of 2023 or by the fall of 2024, there's a Conservative government, which means because of this political reality we're working in, it means that groups and coalitions that have survived on the margins, that we're actually in the best position to discuss with this Conservative government, ironically, because in some ways we're survivors and we do the hard work, and the Conservatives actually, being fiscally conservative, actually thrive with that methodology, with that thinking, rather than when they see other organizations who have received significant funding from the federal Liberal government being very different than NUICC and very different than the coalitions. And so it's an interesting moment for NUICC to actually communicate that the federal government is underutilizing coalitions, that coalitions and our members are actually doing amazing work despite these financial hardships that we're experiencing. And so I think there's a study there, or there's a paper that we need to be writing to say, actually, funding the urban Indigenous strategy has created this much employment in our space, provides this much impact on in our communities, and you're grossly underfunding it. You're grossly taking advantage of it. And if you actually invested equitably in coalitions across the country and the organizations that we represent, and a small amount of money for a national voice, you could actually affect this much impact as well. So those are stories that we will be the only ones to tell. No one else will tell that story for us. And so the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives all need to hear that story. Ian?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That story also needs to be part of lobbying New Democrats, because if the government doesn't change in the near term, it's going to be because of New Democrat support for the Liberals. And that means a deal between Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau. If we can get on Jagmeet Singh's agenda as part of making that deal to continue the Liberals, then so much the better.
So it's an enormous amount of work. And I think it's sort of like, a new job on top. I mean, a lot of people are doing this as volunteers on the side of their desks. A few people are fortunate enough to be able to do this work as paid work. So there's going to be a lot of work to do, and the design of that work is really critical. Otherwise, this is not going to be possible. So the way we design this workflow is the only way we're going to get through it. It's definitely a David and Goliath effort that we're working on. And so being really honest and clear on what we can do, how each piece, using a critical path theory, right? This is all about critical path. We just have to use just as much resources as necessary to get this job done. That sets us up to do that job. That sets us up to do that job. So it's all critical path. There's no extra resources or time or people power. It's just really, really clinical we're gonna have to be. So the way we design it, and we'll be discussing this with National Council next week in Saskatoon, is critical. So providing some historical context, I think I've tried to do a little bit of that today. Damon Johnson is exceptional at that as our national co-chair, setting the stage of what's happened in the last 50 years and what's happened with urban Indigenous strategies. And what is the promise? What is the work that we can do through mutual aid and through the Coalition of Coalitions model? And I've been at the table since September 2020, and I've heard really loud and clear, coalitions need transparency and trust building in what is this promise of NUICC. How is it governed? How do people get elected? How long are terms? How are decisions made? What is the representative structure? So that's the TOR. Really, really necessary. And I think we had hoped, NUICC had hoped to hire a consultant last year, and I think it's just going to be done in rapid fire bits in the months of June and July to say, what do the coalitions feel about these? What does this document around decision making look good? What document do you use for decision making? How is Indigenous knowledge balanced with Robert's Rules of Order or society structures? You know, what is the urban Indigenous path through governance? And so having a voting mechanism and approval mechanism through June and July so that coalitions can feel like, yeah, that's good, or we can live with that, you know, or that piece we can't live with, let's invest our time into discussing that. Or you 3 people go away, come back in 2 weeks with a revision on that. So there's going to be some really quick work done, hopefully 2 months, to build up the TOR to the point. It's obviously it's a living document. It doesn't need to be completed by July, but it needs to be enough so people feel like, yeah, NUICC is doing its work. It's showing up. It's reflexive. It's accountable. So then we can do the work of what is this national urban strategy? You know, what do coalitions already know? I know from here because we also work with MVAC in Vancouver, and MVAC is Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executives Council. MVAC does an annual forum on policies. They build up an urban policy through their forum, and there's 7 groups, seven categories, and housing gets its session, and we get all the best analysis and policy aspirations for housing. Well, I can tell you that policy platform on housing would probably work for 80% of the urban coalitions across country. And when you look at the Housing Caucus in Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executives Council, it's being led by LUMA. Well, LUMA has almost $1 billion in Indigenous housing, urban Indigenous housing in Canada. LUMA is, Marcel Swain was at our national meeting in Ottawa. He spoke at the Musquatus Forum. Like, they've got in-house research staff. The coalitions don't even have the in-house research staff, but the member organization LUMA does. So I'm just painting that story to say, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And in particular around housing, there's also, you know, a national gathering that took place in Winnipeg a few weeks ago. So there's good work already happening. MMIWG implementation, what's happening? TRC implementation, what's happening? So justice, what's happening? We've got our friends in Whitehorse doing awesome work around justice. We've got justice work happening in St. John's, Newfoundland. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we can listen to our sisters and brothers in these different coalitions and say, what do you have? Can you share us? And one person organizes that cluster of documents into a draft survey of policies reflect the good practices for urban coalitions around justice. So again, we don't need to hire a consultant. We don't need to do this external work. We know this stuff ourselves. It's just a matter of assembling it together in a timely way into a form that other people can go like, oh, okay, that's what that means. And here's the top 4 issues. And here's 2 that are specific to Atlantic Canada, but these ones are national, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm seeing Marina nodding. Is that, am I?
Oh, yeah, I'm just taking notes.
Speaking good? Checking in if it's, so does that resonate, Marina, when I'm, yeah?
You bet.
And then the policy platforms is really a way, this was an aspirational thing we talked about 2 years ago with NUICC, is like, could we get to a point where the coalitions are strong enough and the national alliance was strong enough that we could create a national policy platform that we could take to Jagmeet Singh and the federal government and to actually lobby for changes on behalf and with the coalitions. And we know that when you look at the funding levels, NUICC receives 1% of the funding that the NAFC receives, and we receive 8% of the funding that CAP receives. So let's have no illusions. There's a gross inequity, and there's kind of historical factors that NUICC is finding itself in. And so we have to do this work to climb out of the basement, right? To get out of this place of disrespect of having 1% of the funding. And this is sweat equity, this is passion, this is love that we do this work for. And so how do we bring all the love and the passion and our unity together to do this David and Goliath fight? And then we do the phase 4, the UPIP evaluation, and to say, you know, this is what we believe is required to make substantive change. And just, we're close to the ending on this, so we'll just summarize the historical context, why it's important. Probably need to bring folks together and invite some folks who have, you know, like Mark Miracle in Ottawa, maybe Damon Johnson, maybe some other folks who have this historical perspective of what's happened, why it didn't work, why it did work, what are some of the good things that happened in the urban space in the last 20 years in terms of structures and models or funding systems. So we're looking at like, what are those models and what is that history that we've come through?
And some of that work's already been done. Like some of the sessions, for instance, that we hosted at the national gathering in Ottawa a few months back, where Becky and Mark actually sat down to kind of talk about that and round in, I think, is all things that we can take and literally just write up to help build some of those internal documentation.
Yeah, the transcripts and stuff. Yeah. And then the policy platforms, I mentioned that example of AMVAC, how they do such awesome policy forums. And can we organize something where we invite folks to a round of camp days? And we're obviously being tongue-in-cheek here because we're not going to camp, but it's metaphorical. And you participated in NUICC summer camp and all you got is this lousy t-shirt. So that's really, when we do registration, I think Isabella and Chelsea, we literally should actually print a really cool t-shirt. And when you register on the Eventbrite, you have to click your t-shirt size, and we're actually going to send everybody a t-shirt because, hey, like who wants to stay indoors on Zoom while it's beautiful outside? And our kids are saying, you know, when are you going to get off the Zoom, Mom? You know, like we got pressure. And so we're not making, we want to make light of it a little bit because this is heavy lifting work. We didn't choose the time, but it's work that we have to do. And if we can find some time to show up together, let's at least have fun and do this work. So that's why we're calling it summer camp.
And
yeah,
maybe before, just while we got some folks in the room before maybe people have to drop off, we're just kind of thinking, is there any suggestions or ideas for how to encourage folks to kind of show up? We know it's going to be happening during some of the summer months, which is unfortunate, but we wouldn't really know what would motivate folks, not just motivate, but allow or help them to be able to join these sessions. I guess one of the ideas mentioned earlier about polling to kind of help pick a time that might work for some people. Maybe we'll try and stick away from long weekends for scheduling. And we've been toying with the idea of like offering, door prizes or like gift cards or something to just be a little bit of an extra carrot.
I saw Ian's eyes light up when I mentioned the t-shirt.
Yeah, and even the question of the length of each session, like to keep it dynamic. Yeah. And also something that Mike from the North Bay Coalition reminded me of is that these sessions could be shared internally broadly. So it doesn't have to, the link doesn't have to die with the person that receives it, but it definitely should be shared with teams and, other groups that might be interested.
So like the coalition members as well, yeah.
Yeah, Marina, for example, like, do we do justice? Like, would it be better to do like a housing event, the next day a justice event, the next day MMIWG event, like, or is it better to do like 4 events in one 3-hour session and get it over with? Or is it better to just focus on people who would just want to speak to justice and aren't interested in housing, for example?
I think it's important to have a general overview of everything. So I myself am going to try to make every meeting. I think that's Chantel's thought too, Chantel Genier, but it's kind of been it's a tough time for her. So I'm around all summer. It doesn't matter to me when you have a meeting. I'll be here all summer. I can certainly share it with our team and see if anybody there has any interest. Yeah, it's funny. We're a team, but we all work in our own little silos, right? But yeah, I can think of a couple of people who would have interest in being at these meetings as well. within my team. Yeah,
Good. That's great feedback.
yeah.
Just to finish off the couple slides. So yeah, so this is, for example, an area that we could cluster policy around. It's never perfect, but this is potentially a model. And when we, I think we've covered this well during the meeting today around the UPIP evaluation. And to Chelsea's question, you know, what do folks need? We want it to be empowering. We do not want this to be like experts speaking to, you know, so-called experts speaking to, you know, this is really about mutual aid at the end of the day, because that's who we are. And that's our strengths. That's what NUICC, that is a core definition of NUICC, right? Mutual aid, coalitions to coalitions. And so capacity building and sharing is really the most powerful thing. And so how do we create space and time in these spaces and the document sharing and the way we conduct a meeting so that when there's a housing discussion, that there's 4 or 5 coalitions sharing that discussion. So there's some, I think, some surveying or some questions that we can do as Bell and Chelsea around what works for folks. That was the summer camp. I think we're almost wrapped up. But just to quickly cover this piece, because this is also happening in the background. So this is the system that the NUICC Knowledge Hub has adopted as its file sharing system. So rather than having a bunch of stuff in a Google folder, you know, with a title called housing, and there's like 8 documents in it, and you can find it or you can't find it. You don't know what to click on. You don't know if it's useful for you. You don't know who published it. You don't, you know, because it's just some PDF document. PKP is a very different system. It's a file management system that publishes knowledge, stories, transcripts, videos, poetry, academic papers, policy positions, and other members in the other coalitions will review those documents and add their voices to why it's relevant to them. And so then each document will have an abstract. It'll have like an introduction to like, hey, I really, Lindsay's just sent us a document from Toronto on UNDRIP, sorry, on the limits of JEDI. This is what we really loved about it. I'm from the something coalition, and we're going to use it for this reason. And then we add some keywords to it. So it's about justice, and it's about equity, and it's about colonialism, and it's about, you know. And so then when we wanted to do an event, or a coalition in Winnipeg is doing an event on UNDRIP, for example, it goes into the PKP system and grabs anything with an UNDRIP keyword in it, an UNDRIP hashtag, right? So the system is adaptable to people's needs, and it's a file sharing system that's not like a Google Docs, right, where just stuff is stored. We want stuff to be stored, but we actually want it to be, you know, to communicate. We want it to kind of be interactive with our needs, and then we can publish. For example, someone could just publish all those things that say UNDRIP. He's like, hey, wow, look, we've got like 12 documents on UNDRIP implementation in cities. Let's publish it as a group of 12 documents. And that's now a new journal just on UNDRIP. So that's why the PKP system is so awesome. So hopefully I gave a good overview of it. And we really want to make sure that these sessions today was a bit of an intro, but as we build a community around the research work for NUICC, we want there to be time and space for coalitions to also share their work. And so I know there's just a couple of folks on the call here that are new to the work. So feel free to jump in and share something that you're doing. I did mention that we were out in Toronto recently at the NUICC conference, Native American Indigenous Studies Association, some really cool sessions on urban Indigenous in Taiwan. You know, you think sometimes that the experiences of urban Indigenous people in Canada is unique, but in fact, there's a lot of similarities around urbanization for urban Indigenous people from other countries. And they are also doing policy work and policy fights. So we can learn also from other places, other jurisdictions. And we had some beautiful pens. And so hopefully we get to see everybody. Maybe we'll call them the summer camp pens. All right.
Marina,
yeah.
I know your group recently had a justice forum recently. Is that true,
Or
or did it
Justice
happen?
Caucus?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do those quarterly.
Mhm.
And it's everybody comes in from the communities surrounding Whitehorse. And over 3 days, we share what's going on in the communities, the problems that they're having within the justice system, successes they're having within the justice system. And I was just thinking, in my particular area, right now I've got the ear of Senator Pat Duncan and our MP Brendan Hanley, so I can talk to them as well. And yeah, and that's why I keep nodding. I keep getting these ideas, and that's what the nods are for. But yeah, it's a great way to share data, I suppose, on what's going on out there in the communities, because we don't talk to them all the time. And again, we take all that information and work on the information we've been given, and make changes that way. So I'm seeing a lot of parallels in ways that we could assist NUICC as well. But of course I had to talk to Chantel first, so I can't promise anything, but yeah, it's yeah, I'm excited with all this work going on.
Oh,
Good.
thanks, Marina. And Juliana, did you have any, I think you mentioned during our Northern Regional meeting, you know, a desire about, you know, how that could work in the North as well, about, you know, how to, as a service hub, Cambridge Bay as a service hub for the communities surrounding, how to, you know, I guess, demonstrate or support, you know, the wider region that the Cambridge Bay serves, you know, by perhaps, you know, what would that look like? Would it look like almost like, you know, these similar kind of caucus meetings, or, you know, how do people know more about coalitions and how they work and how it works together? I think that's something that you mentioned before.
Yes, I think it's something that we were talking about during our last meeting. We are calling coalitions those that have received the funding to operate during the past the 3 years. So then we just had 2 of them in Nunavut, although they are always having, they're calling different names, maybe interregions meetings, or other kind of ways that they are working, that we could try to collaborate with people and talk to them and say like, look, this is what we are trying to do together. This is what we could envision. And yeah, as you have mentioned, Cambridge Bay is the hub for the Kitikmeot region, and we have other smaller communities around us. We also have, we're thinking about we still don't have the answer of the continuation of the coalition work for the 2 next year. But if we do, this was one of our first ideas, to create a kind of a newsletter that would share the information, because the service also available in Cambridge Bay through the members of the coalitions are also available for the rest of the region. So we don't want to make it available just for Cambridge Bay. We want to spread the word around the other communities in our region. So we are trying to see, and because our coalition also is acting on so many different levels and different subgroups, we're trying to see, we don't want to overwhelm the different potential new coalitions growing up. We wanna, this is one of the things that I have seen what you guys are doing in the Yukon, and this is the reason why sharing and learning is so nice and so important. You guys are focused on justice, and that shows like, okay, this is what we have been working on. Those are our partners. We have more than 15 members in different 7 subgroups, work groups. So it's good to see how things they go, and maybe we're going to start sharing some information, and those new coalitions, they will be more focused once they will be starting.
Yeah, I think too, once we have our terms of reference, it will be easier to put it out to the other coalitions. So yeah, that's something I'm thinking about right now too, is
Yeah.
bringing everyone together and presenting what NUICC does
Mhm.
and future plans. Yeah.
One thing that Lindsay from Toronto's brought up is the idea of having, you know, a bit of an understanding, as you know, especially when it comes to information and data sharing about between coalitions and NUICC, or you know, the region of coalitions and NUICC, to kind of help, you know, frame and you know, define like the relationship and make sure that everybody has confidence in the, you know, process and system going forward.
You bet.
So that, I think that's something we're looking forward to exploring and discussing kind of in our upcoming sessions. So, and is there anything else, Erwin?
We could end the video recording and then just speak informally.
Sure.